Hello, Tigers. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Amy Hunt, Senior Director of Development for the College of Engineering, Computing and Applied Sciences. Welcome to tonight's discussion. In this session, our panel will discuss how the upstate region in particular and communities across the nation in general is expecting changes in infrastructure as we get through COVID and prepare the region for the future. I'd like to start by introducing Anand Gramapati, Dean of the College of Engineering, Computing and Applied Sciences here at Clemson University. Anand joined Clemson in 1992 as an assistant professor. He was named chairman of the Industrial Engineering Department in 2003 and assistant to the dean of the college in 2010. In 2011, he was appointed associate vice president for workforce development. Anand assumed the position of dean in 2013. He now oversees 12 departments with an enrollment of almost 7,000 students. Welcome, Anand.
Amy, thank you. Can you all hear me loud and clear? Just give me a thumbs up. Wonderful. First and foremost, let me thank our panelists for being over here. This session is co-hosted by my good colleague, John Lummis, who will be later introduced by Amy Hunt. As part of the Thriving in Interesting Times series, this is our fourth such panel. And our audience is really enthralled by the discussions and the outcomes that come from the inputs that are provided by the audience, as well as the great wisdom that our panelists provide. I'm thankful for Mark Johnson for being the MC for the show. Today, we have a wonderful panel to speak about infrastructure. We've got John Bemis from Carrier Capital Management, Chris Fallon, President Duke Energy Renewables, Graham Rich, Chief Executive Officer, REWA, David Vaughn, Professor of Practice and Director of Clemson Engineers for Developing Countries. Without any further ado, I will hand it back to Amy. Amy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anand. John Lummis, as Anand has already explained, John is our co-sponsor for this series, and he serves as the president and CEO for Upstate South Carolina Alliance. In this role, John is responsible for overseeing the direction of the Alliance, as well as running the day-to-day operations. The Upstate South Carolina Alliance is the regional economic development organization for the 10 counties here in the upstate, with a focus on marketing, lead generation, research, advocacy, and thought leadership regarding economic development for the region. Welcome, John.
I think John's on mute.
Yes.
No.
Yes, and now, John, I will give you a few minutes to get your audio situated. I'm going to welcome Mark Johnson. Mark will serve as our moderator for tonight's discussion. Mark is the director of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing at Clemson University, and he is the Thomas F. Hash Endowed Chair in Sustainable Development as a professor of material science. In his career, Mark has been an entrepreneur, an academic, and a government official. Mark earned his PhD from North Carolina State and his BS from MIT, both in material science and engineering. Welcome, Mark.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, and Amy, before we get going, I think you've got a few housekeeping items.
Yes, I do. Well, I'm certainly excited for our panelists this evening, and we thank you so much for joining us. A few housekeeping items. We have begun to record the session, and a copy will be sent following tonight's conversation, both to you and to anyone who was sent the invitation and could not attend. To limit audio feedback, please keep your audio on mute until you would like to say something, most especially for our panelists. If you are having connection issues at any point, then turning off your video for our panelists may help just briefly. If you have any question for our panelists, please put a comment in the chat box. As Dean Gramapati has explained, we do want your feedback and your input is absolutely welcome. If you have a question, then we will certainly try to fit it in, but we may not get to all of them. Tonight's topic is a very exciting one and there's a lot of interest. So I will now turn it over to Mark to introduce the discussion topic even more and welcome our panelists.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Amy. And John, I think what we'll do is wait at the very end so John Levis knows this, and at the end, he can make a couple of closing remarks at the very end. We'll call an audible on that one. But good evening, everyone. Tonight, our discussion is really going to be about infrastructure. Start out by talking over the past year. I don't think I've ever appreciated infrastructure as much as I have in this past year, as we've all responded to COVID. Making sure that we wind up having power, we have water, and more important, just as important, telecommunications connections in our houses. So we're able to wind up keeping going has been essential over the past year. So there's a heightened understanding of the importance of that. And just as important, when you're coming out of an economic downturn, there's always a discussion of infrastructure. And that investment happens in a number of places. There is in the private sector, for instance, companies are looking at it and saying, there are some things that over the past year we need to catch up on. How do we wind up spending and making sure we're building those systems back up so that they wind up working and are productive for us, as well as building for the future? In the public sector, infrastructure mechanisms are often a way to wind up getting people back to work by employing people in the construction of these new facilities. That often becomes what are called shovel-ready projects, and that winds up leading to really jumpstarting that economy and getting people back to work. So, it also builds a sustained infrastructure that we're going to be using to support our high standard of living. So there's a double bottom line investment opportunity that winds up coming out of that. And, I think that appreciation over the last 12 months is something we've all wound up really getting a heightened appreciation of. And as a result, that winds up leading to our discussions today. So our panelists today, I want to introduce a few really great panelists we have to talk on the subject. Looking at it in kind of four different lenses, one around engineering for telecommunications, one around water systems, one around electrical energy systems, and also bringing that together is how do we wind up investing in all this infrastructure as well. So we'll start out, we've got John Beeman. He's an investment specialist at Carla Capital Management. He joined Carla from Mac Real Estate Group and Area Property Partners, where he was the portfolio manager and head trader for Clarios Real Estate Securities Fund from 2008 to 2018. Previously, he's been a senior vice president and head mortgage securities trader at Lehman Brothers, vice president and head of trading for Donaldson Lufkin Jenrette, DLJ, and a manager of the real estate financing group at KPMG, Pete Marwick. John holds a BS in accounting from Clemson as an MBA from Columbia Business School with a concentration in real estate finance. For electrical systems, we've got Chris Fallon. He's the president of Duke Energy Renewables and senior vice president of energy solutions for delivery and operations at Duke Energy. He's got a BS and MS degree, both in electrical engineering from Clemson University as a registered professional engineer in North Carolina. He's got 28 years of experience in the energy industry. Chris began his career at the company in 1992 as a power quality engineer at Duke Power. Previously served as Duke Energy's vice president of nuclear development. Today he's responsible for the company's delivery and operations functions, which includes large-scale renewable asset operations, as well as small-scale renewable businesses, project development, project delivery, and project operations. So really oversees a lot of this infrastructure assets that they wind up having, particularly around renewable and sustainable energy. Relative to water, we have Graham Rich. He's the chief executive officer of REWA, which I always just thought was REWA as the acronym. It's the Renewable Water Resources Association here in Greenville. He holds a BS and MS degree in civil engineering at Clemson as a registered professional engineer. He's a board certified environmental engineer with the American Society of Environmental Engineers. He has 30 years of experience in water and wastewater industries, as well as environmental engineering. He's been served as chief executive officers for utilities across South Carolina, Ohio, Arkansas. So he's got deep experience in working on a lot of these issues. Finally, relative to telecommunications, we've got David Vaughn. He's a professor of practice and the director of Clemson University's Engineers for Developing Countries at Clemson University. Now, what's interesting about David, and I'm certain share this, is how much using those skills for engineering for developing countries and looking at it particularly around telecommunications projects here in South Carolina as well. So David has 30 years of project management experience in a diverse set of industries: pharmaceuticals, chemicals, oil and gas, steel, microelectronics, water treatment, and contingency operations. His experiences in rapid deployment, planning, disaster management, and reconstruction is the culmination of his work in support of the U.S. Army Sustainment Command, FEMA, USACE, WEF, UN, and various private sector companies. David's passion for his profession is demonstrated in his personal commitment to several humanitarian projects, including serving as a vice president and co-chair for Practical Community Resilience, a working group that is implementing strategies that help economically challenged communities build resilience, as well as mentoring Clemson's engineers for developing countries. So with that, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start out here today by just asking you each a simple questions we wind up going around. If you can explain, what the organization you're in and what sort of role it has in infrastructure, what assets you have, and how you look at that infrastructure in particular. How's it gone over the past year? So Graham, why don't we start out with you, if you don't mind?
Hey, thank you very much. Of course, we like to think we're the most critical infrastructure around. We call it a miracle every time you flush. We are in charge of conveyance and treatment of wastewater within Greenville and parts of 4 other counties in the upstate. We are the driver, we believe, in the quality of life in Greenville County, not only from an economic development standpoint, but also from an environmental quality standpoint. There's a reason why Greenville County is the largest county in terms of population, and we believe this is an unparalleled quality of life here in Greenville. The past 12 months obviously have been a challenge, but anybody that has been in the infrastructure business has done years and years of resiliency planning. And this goes back to one of my earliest jobs that I had right out of college when Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston, and I was over the water system at City of Charleston. And so we have learned from a lot of these natural disasters. Granted, COVID has provided a different challenge in terms of dealing more with the human capital than other issues and infrastructure within our system. But we have done well, much better than I would have ever expected that we would have done. And I think a lot of that is a result of our ability to plan for other types of issues similar to COVID, hurricanes, climate change, all of those types of things.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you very much. Chris, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about electric power and how that infrastructure is going, and particularly over the past year, people are relying on living at home, and has that changed what's going on in infrastructure, the way you guys look at it?
Thanks, Mark. So just a little bit of, I think if anybody here is from the Carolinas, they're probably a customer of Duke Energy. And so I would hope that they appreciate the service they get, which, empowers their lives or powers their lives and, lets them work remotely, lets them, still enjoy the quality of life that they've had. So, so Duke Energy, the large Duke Energy, it serves the infrastructure, but it powers the lives of our customers. And we serve 7.7 million customers over 6 states. So we have a significant impact there. But then specific to my business, I'm responsible for our commercial renewable business and our distributed energy solutions business. So we are, helping customers meet their sustainability and resiliency goals. And so we have 4.5 gigawatts of wind, solar, and storage projects all across the United States. We're in 22 states. We've got 21 wind farms, 150 solar farms, and 2 battery storage projects. So, and we impact customers in a sense that customers are counting on us to deliver that energy so that they can ultimately deliver it to their customers. So this year has been a challenge, and we'll talk about that through the time. But I think that electricity is an incredibly important part of our lives, and so it was up to us this year to make sure that we were still able to deliver. And and I thought my team did a fantastic job doing that this year.
That's great. That's great. David, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you're doing, particularly your role as what Clemson's Engineers for Developing Countries does, and what some of the projects are you wind up doing through that.
So in the last year and a half, we spent a lot of time really doing research on broadband and how broadband is either positively or negatively affecting across the nation. And really and truly what's happened is that with COVID, I think it's almost caught us, but also the nation kind of flat-footed. There's a lot of businesses and everything that did have good connections. A lot of people that had them at their homes, but we do have a lot of issues that we're trying to deal with across the state of South Carolina. But at the same time, as we started looking into what is Clemson's role with regard to broadband, it's a lot of people don't realize that we have this network called C-Light, where Clemson is actually supplying broadband services to nearly every academic institution across the state. So there's a lot of benefits that I think Clemson has been able to provide to the state of South Carolina. And now we're actually working across the agencies in the state to try to find solutions to address some of the gaps that we currently have in the state.
Great. Thank you very much. So all of this infrastructure doesn't come for free, whether it's building a sewer system, a electric power system, or actually, renovating a house. All of this infrastructure winds up taking money, and often that winds up falling on the financial community as well. So we have John with us here tonight. John, I wonder, what are some of the observations? First of all, what does your company wind up doing relative to supporting those sort of investments? And then how have you seen this past year?
So simply said, we are investors. We invest in all aspects of the global marketplace, focuses on U.S. fixed income securities. And in the equity markets, we generally do it through ETF form, through a macro standpoint. We generally don't invest in individual companies, so you try to keep it on the macro level. My particular focus, which comes from years of experience with the broker-dealers, is in real estate debt and equities, commercial real estate debt and equities. That's what the C is in CMBS. And really, for us, it's given the importance of infrastructure and supporting the operations of various real estate developers, property managers, and other players. We're always extremely interested in how state and local governments are using the pandemic, especially, as a reason how to jumpstart the economic bounce back in their regions through the use of these targeted infrastructure projects. It could be supporting the regentrification of a downtrodden area in a town, either large or small. Either the residential or commercial parts of the city, could be in the form of laying the groundwork for new large-scale developments, similar to Hudson Yards in New York City. It could be in improvements to transportation resources, like the high-speed rail efforts in Colorado and California. We look to see how those impact various communities and how those will impact individual properties in those communities. We really look for the changes that are going to assist the ability of companies to pay off their mortgage debt as agreed, or to generate profits that are going to drive their equity valuations to outperform their benchmarks, because we want to make sure we understand how things outperform or underperform. And because we are a hedge fund, I know that's a bad word a lot of places, we also look for areas of the country that really need material infrastructure improvements, but are unlikely to find financing for it. They can't find the funding, either because their state and local governments are having material financial issues, or they can't find any private investment for it. So we'll look for those areas as well, so that we can go against the grain and either short it in the form of commercial mortgage-backed security derivatives, or we'll do it through, we could even short munis in some cases.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you. I mean, actually, I don't think hedge fund's a bad word. Wind up needing to make these investments, and they're needed investments, right? I want to come back to Chris real quickly on this. I think as we were talking last week on this, I shared with you, my father actually worked for the power company when I was growing up in Minnesota, and was one of those people that go in at midnight on Christmas Eve, make sure the electric, he worked in a generating station and someone had to be there. So with that, I mean, I'm struck during the time of COVID, where everyone else is actually having to do remote work. utilities and especially electric power and things that need 24/7, you've got to be able to make sure people are able to work, they're able to be there, that the people become that sort of hidden front line of frontline workers on COVID. How's your company kind of, are there things you've done around that, or is this following contingency plans and you're ready to go?
No, I mean, when this hit, we had to adapt, right? This was we know how to respond to storms. We know how to respond to outages. We know how to respond this was a new thing, this was a new event that we needed to learn to respond to. And so, at the beginning, like you said, we have a lot of essential workers, and I'll just use from my own organization, our wind and solar techs, the people who did the preventative maintenance every day, the corrective maintenance, right? When this first hit and we started to transition to work, remote work, the technicians were like, why can't we do that? Right? They're like, this isn't fair. Why are we put at risk? Right? We didn't know what was going on. But I will say that I think we did a very good job. We gave them the proper PPE. We changed our processes, the way we do our plan of the day meetings, the way we do work. Because I mean, when you're 300 feet up in the air in a wind tower, in a wind turbine, you don't work alone. So we had to put in processes and procedures so that those folks could remain safe and feel comfortable that they were being safe, right? We used to have two technicians per truck. We had to go out and rent another 100+ trucks. So we weren't traveling by air. I mean, we have assets in Texas. It is 13-hour drive from our southernmost asset to our northernmost asset, right? So just things like that. So we had to adapt, right? And I think at the beginning, the thought mindset was, well, this is going to be a couple days. Well, it wasn't. It was,
Yeah.
But I will say that the team has done a fantastic job. We've had low infection rates. They have adapted their processes to remain safe. And then just one story about the events in Texas last week, that we had a battery that was providing critical services to ERCOT so that they could maximize the amount of load they could serve and keep as many people on as possible. We had to staff that 24/7. And so again, you have COVID protocols and you have these essential workers. People they don't appreciate the sacrifices in the work, but they made it work, right? And they were there every night staffing that battery or staffing that 24/7 so that if any little hiccup occurred, they were there to fix it, to make sure that the asset ran like it was and provided the value back to the customers.
Oh, that's great. I think, isn't this something Glenn Campbell actually wrote a song about? Is, lineman, Kansas lineman. I mean, that's a tough job to be out there, but you're the person that keeps that going. Graham, for you guys, you've had it twofold because you've not only had to keep the water system running, but I know, in Greenville, you've got a major construction project underway right now. How have you guys had to adapt around that?
Well, I think similar to Duke Energy, I mean, we knew that this was potentially a big issue early on. Of course, we all were new in terms of how to protect the employees, how we were going to work together, but we knew that we had to make sure that the essential services were being done. And so our field personnel were there. They never skipped a beat. We obviously, similar to Duke, we had to only have one person in truck. We dismissed any kind of common gatherings. We made sure that people, when they came into work, answered certain questions. And we had a lot of direct communication with all the employees, not only about work and how to stay safe at work, but also at home when they were with their families, and the importance that they practice all the safe protocols that they could. Construction really never missed a beat here. In fact, I would contend that we're busier than we've ever been here at REWA, and so we've been very fortunate. I think a lot of it through careful planning, making sure that we're following all the proper protocols, making sure that we take all of this very seriously. But at the end of the day, I think the employees took ownership in this. They knew they had a job to do. And I think they're very proud of what we're doing. We've rewarded them for working through this difficult time and making sure that we've not let service have any service disruptions on it. And so I think whether it's water, whether it's electric, whether it's gas, the critical essential services have done extremely well during all this. Granted, you saw what happened in Texas, and that's a little bit different because it was weather related. But I think in our industry as a whole, we've done very well in terms of making sure we're not missing a beat.
That's great. Thank you. So, David, I wonder if you can wind up sharing, you're not only looking at these issues, but you're doing that working with students. We have all of our own protocols with the university of how do we wind up safely operating as a student with the students. How has that wound up affecting you through the whole COVID experience? Oh, mute.
Yeah, I've got the mute on. I was following directions. We've actually gained ground during this time. And so what happened is that would have been 18 months ago, Clemson Engineers for Developing Countries, we actually adopted Microsoft Teams. And so it doesn't operate like a normal classroom. It actually operates like a corporation, and to where students come into the organization as group members, work their way up, but they really operate literally in a organizational chart. Last February, about this time, we were literally talking about COVID and what was going to happen. And we started hearing the rumors that, everyone may have to go online at some point in time. Basically, I turned to the students and said, okay, you need to write your own continuity of operations plan. They drafted that plan. By March 10th, it was in place. On the 23rd, we were all online, and we had to change the way we worked. But what we actually found out is that we were actually being more productive. Meanwhile, we said, okay, well, while everyone else is hunkered down, we will take ground. So we actually sought funding for the research. We focused on broadband and many other things across the state. And through the summer, we were going full bore with probably 20, 21 interns. And we've actually kept that going all the way through this semester now. And we're actually having a lot of progress. It's the real issue is that there's many areas of the state that are not as fortunate.
Yeah. Well, I do want to reinforce what you just said there, because for both people on the panel and anyone that are in the audience today, we have a series of engineers that David works with, that they not only know what a continuity of operation planning is, but they actually know how to write it themselves. So just contact David on that, and I'm certainly going to connect you up with the people, and the students will be happy to work in the private sector, work in the public sector afterwards on it. John, when we were talking before at the preparing for this panel, you said, well, you've got continuity of operations. At the end of the day, you're a bank or you're a hedge fund, and you've got to take care of your staff. But I'm wondering if also the other thing you have to wind up taking care of is, as you've noted, you're putting money out there. You're deciding when to put money out there. Is it something where, going through COVID, you've said, let's, keep powder dry for a while, or is there opportunities that have sort of popped up, or how has that affected sort of the investment profile on some of these big projects?
Well, from our standpoint, in the beginning of COVID, everything got smacked around. The markets completely melted down. Interest rates, which generally people will use as hedges, significantly rallied. They went down as low as 50 basis points on the 10 years. So everybody's hedges cost them a ton of money from that standpoint. But like most people, we rebounded, we sold what we could, and then we started looking around at the opportunities in the marketplace, and they were widespread. CMBS is generally a product that comes in two different forms. One we call single asset, single borrower, which are those deals that are either a single asset, like a Hudson Yards building, or a hotel, be it a hotel, significant hotel, like the Fontainebleau in Miami, or the Lowe's in Miami. Or it could be a large mall of America. It could be, there's a portfolio of malls that are backed by Brookfield. That one is in Columbia, South Carolina, one is in Hoover, Alabama, and one is in Rochester, Minnesota. All of those assets significantly underperformed the market for treasuries They widened out hundreds and hundreds of basis points. In some cases, you had bonds that were AA rated go down 40 points in value. So that's 40 percentage points. At that point, if you have capital or you have relationships with existing banks, which will lend you the capital at that point on like a repurchase type agreement, you can make some significant investments. While we took a pretty big hit, like many of our peers in March and April, we rebounded nicely and had finished with a nice positive year. So, the fact is things were volatile, things were choppy, but there were significant investments out there for you to invest in and really see some extremely nice outperformance. I think most sophisticated investors, especially most hedge funds, and you can even look at the GameStop opportunity that everybody saw recently if you just want to look at it this way. When things are at their worst is when you need to be making sure that you're buying, because that's the only time that you're going to really make outsized gains on the way up. And things fall, but things always rebound.
Yeah, what's the old saying? When there's blood on the floor, buy, or something like that. That's
when there's blood in the streets, buy.
Exactly. Well, with that in mind, a lot of, especially public sector financing, there's discussions of substantial increase in potential infrastructure projects. I think, talking about rail systems and things like that, as we did before. Are you sort of getting ramped up for that, or how do you prepare for that sort of thing?
Well, that's more of a private equity type business play. The private equity real estate companies will be making those, and they can either do it in the form of equity investments or they can do it in the form of debt financing. And my peers, especially those people at Mac Real Estate, which used to be the real estate arm of Apollo Global, they have that opportunity. They can do that. We are in the securities markets only, so we wait for things to get the debt to be created and then securitized into the marketplace. But there is a significant amount of cash out there in many different forms to fund a lot of these infrastructure projects. BlackRock has a huge infrastructure funding program, Blackstone as well. They're out there and they've got cash to spend. So if people have good projects, and you need introductions to people, I will make those introductions for you because I do know of those individuals.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. So, Graham, when talking about resources becoming available, what sort of ideas I know you're finishing a big capital spending project here in downtown Greenville, and I don't know if you want to describe that a little bit for the panel. I know it's a big tunnel, but don't know all the details of it. And then what are some of the other things that might be invested in at a time like this? Oh, you.
Sorry about that. We've not seen any downturn in construction or in terms of development here in Greenville County. The Big Dig, which you described as a $42 million project, which was the first tunnel here in the upstate that ran through the middle of downtown Greenville for 1.2 miles. And that's just one example of the need for wastewater capacity when you are growing at such a rapid rate as this area is. We have not seen any shortcomings in revenue, and quite frankly, with the market right now, interest rates being what they are, we're borrowing money at all-time lows. And I've been doing this for over 30 years. And I can remember when interest rates got below double digits and people were saying, you better borrow now because they'll not get any lower. And that was 25 years ago. So, I mean, it is, our last bond issue had a true interest cost of less than 2% on it. So we're borrowing money at unprecedented low rates. Our revenues have not been impacted at all during all of this, which is amazing. And people continue to move down here. And so it's, if anything, growth and construction and all that has just continued to grow at unprecedented levels, which makes absolutely no sense in a time where we've had this pandemic. So I would never have thought that. So
yeah, well, it's interesting to see.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, go right
Graham,
ahead.
How much did you say that project was going to cost?
$42 million.
You're building a 1.5 long tunnel through downtown Greenville, and it only cost $42 million.
Right.
We built a 300-yard bridge up here in New York, and it cost $600 million.
You need to hire Graham Rich to come up to New York and help.
I tell you what, I'm gonna promote you for mayor of New York City.
Yeah, you know, they gave me the key to the city last week, so yeah. But no, it's you know, you look at building bridges and tunnels are obviously two different types of infrastructure projects, it's if you are going to build right now, now's the time to do it, particularly if you're borrowing money. So.
That's terrific. You know, that I was going to mention that across sectors, it's interesting to see how things a year ago we thought were going to slow down have not slowed down. And you look at things like, you know, speaking for John Lummis, the manufacturing sector in the upstate right now is booming. You look at automotive sales. I mean, it's in the news about how 12 months ago, all the auto manufacturers were thinking we're going to have a downturn in automotives, and sales have outstripped manufacturing to the point where now they've got supply chain problems of how do they get enough, you know, semiconductor parts and chips and things like that. You know, being on your feet really does wind up mattering and figuring out how to manage things at this time. So you know, Chris, are you seeing a similar thing across the country on this? Because it seems like, especially in the upstate area where you know, I wouldn't say things are going well, but it's, you know, people have adapted and things are going depending on a sector. You know, how's it going? You've got assets all across the country.
So, I mean, we have not seen demand go down for renewable assets. So right now there is significant demand from a customer standpoint, large customers, the Amazons, Googles of the world, right? They've made commitments to their customers that they're going to source 100% of their energy from renewable resources. So they're out buying up as much as they can. We can't keep up with their demand. At our utilities, our customers are demanding cleaner energy, greener energy. The investment community, ESG, is a very big component investing today. So they're looking for that environmental, social governance piece, right? And so there are a lot of ESG dollars chasing investment, right? And then you line that up with what's happening in Washington, the new Biden administration, right? You mentioned it before, when you have a down economy, they look at infrastructure projects to create jobs. Well, the Biden administration is looking to create, you know, a green economy, more green energy jobs. And so they're putting policies and incentives in place that are going to drive demand for renewable energy. I mean, we put 1 gigawatt of new assets on in 2020. So we spent, $1.5 billion on those assets. And we've got plans at Duke Energy to double our renewable portfolio, both on the regulated and commercial side, by 2025. And so, we're moving towards that, and we're going to achieve it because that's what we've committed to our stakeholders, our customers, that we're going to do. So I see that the opportunities are fantastic over the next 5 to 10 years, and maybe beyond that, to make infrastructure investments in the renewable space.
Yeah, I think that's great. I did some work in the energy and renewable space before coming to Clemson, and I think it's great from a financial perspective once you've done it, because basically you make money when the sun comes up, right, or the wind blows, right? It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's a good thing, right? That winds up happening. So it's not only DC though, David, but I think in South Carolina there's some investments that are going on around telecommunications and things like that. That are being made at the state level that you all are involved in, right? Through Clemson and looking at some of the broadband work.
Well, indirectly right now, and we're trying to figure out what is the role and how can Clemson help the state move forward. I mean, we do have challenges right now. I mean, luckily there was the CARES Act funding that came in with COVID, and a lot of that money came down and was pushed out. There's a lot of different development that is happening across the state with regard to broadband, getting fiber out there. Within the schools, we've seen a lot of the hot spots that are being dispersed. And for the most part, that's working well, but we also have areas, say across the I-95 corridor that doesn't have adequate cellular service. So even though you've got the hotspots there, a lot of the students still aren't getting the adequate coverage. So those are areas that really do require investment. And we're really looking at billions of dollars that need to be spent in the state. And right now, this was back in the summer, we were looking at access to broadband, and I think we came up with 24.7% of the state was lacking adequate access to broadband. And this is where I hate to sit on the panel with, Duke and Rewall, because these guys are doing a really great job. And the problem is with broadband is that it's comprised of a lot of the broadband providers. We've got some co-ops and, that are across the state, and it's kind of a mishmash. And we've got to figure out how do we come up with a good formula? The nice thing is that with the state, they're actually putting legislation in place to enable all these co-ops to move forward and get people connected.
Yeah, yeah. And as well as obviously tying in, giving connectivity to individuals, that opens up the education system. I know from the work that we've been looking at Clemson around, manufacturing, one of the largest employers in rural communities in South Carolina is actually the manufacturing sector. Right. So if you're a small manufacturer in somewhere on the I-95 corridor, you need that so you can compete against your competitor globally. And we sell things globally. So, it's essential we get that kind of investment out there as well. So
absolutely.
Hey, John, I'm interested following up on some of the investment relative to this. I know we're looking at sort of, at least in my area, some of the manufacturing investments in early stage companies. And you look especially things like, investment capital into, venture capital, that sort of investments, small businesses. It seems like in a way it's never, it's been booming times right now where you've got the SPAC market for, battery companies and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if you've got an observation on that relative to that's building the capabilities for all the infrastructure that'll be put in.
Well, I think there's one of the things that we've seen is there's more cash out there ready to spend for a variety of different investments than honestly I've seen ever. It seems like everyone has endless dry powder. So from the SPAC market, you've seen things, go up crazy like Nikola, and their energy, battery trucks, battery-driven trucks to Workhorse, and their battery-driven trucks for the Postal Service. But the SPAC market, we're very wary of that. It just seems like it is really just a vehicle to create personal wealth through a variety of different smoke and mirror tactics. If you can be the lucky recipient of a SPAC acquisition, good for you. But from an investment standpoint, I would treat that with some kid gloves. I've heard more bad stories than good stories. From the investment standpoint. I think where we're mainly concerned is, we're spending all these federal dollars to increase just spending. I mean, really just in putting it in individuals' hands and corporate hands and state and local government's hands. And this is going to have to be paid for at some point. And are we stretching the rubber band so tightly that we're going to get a major rate sell-off before a lot of the debt can be issued at attractive rates in order to fund these projects? And I think we saw a little bit of that today. I don't know how closely anybody was watching the market, but we had what they call a taper tantrum, a nasty one earlier around 1 o'clock this afternoon. The market for interest rates bounced up about 35 basis points in about a 1 hour period. And then it recovered, most of that. So you have to be very careful these days. It's a tough time out there.
So from what you're saying is, it sounds like there's capital available, but how you spend it, you want to make sure you're investing it into things that will be productive for the future, not just sort of frivolous frothiness in how that money is used.
Yeah, and that's why I would point to, the major private equity firms who have the infrastructure themselves necessary to do the work to analyze the projects for future viability and ability to pay off the debt. And those are the individuals you want to go to receive your funding. And if you can get in touch with them, great. Those are the best sources because they also have the knowledge, the intellectual experience necessary to help put you in touch with people to help you complete your projects in an efficient manner. They'll draw from a variety of different resources. Whereas, I think some of the SPACs, you might just get one or two people who happen to raise a fund.
Yeah.
And they're just going to use their own individual and try to, railroad you down the way that's going to make them the most money. Whereas somebody like a BlackRock or a Blackstone or a Wamco or a PIMCO, they'll actually have funds and draw from experience that will help you complete your projects.
Have the management carry through. Great. Well, thanks. So, Chris, having gone through this experience, and I know you brought up the word ERCOT, and I said in this I wouldn't talk about ERCOT in our prep, but both for COVID and the past weeks and lessons learned, how do you see that playing out going forward from lessons learned about how you do business, both as an individual, as a corporation, all that sort of stuff?
So I'll say when this started, and I'll take a little bit of a team focus on my answer here. When this started, I was very cynical, or skeptical is probably a better term, about the working from home, work remote. Like, how were we still going to be able to meet our commitments? And it's far exceeded my expectations. The team has done an incredible job of transitioning to working remotely. And so I think this is going to open up a lot of opportunities as we move forward, right? So it's going to change our real estate footprint. It's going to change how efficient we are working, right? How many people we need, where we put people, right? I think we're going to get a lot more flexibility out of that. One of the challenges I think we're going to face, right? It's all not good. It's not everything's great, right? I think the other challenge is, how do we identify that next group of leaders, right? How does this change your leadership style from when everybody's in the office and it's a lot of charisma based and who talking to people around meetings, versus remotely where you're doing team and Zoom meetings, and you've got to be very efficient in making sure everybody's getting their work done, right? So I think that's the one thing that we're looking at is, how do we there's a lot of people who want to continue to work remotely, and they're very happy and they're very productive. And so we're going to, help them meet their needs. And then, how do we also make sure that they're advancing in their careers and that we're giving them the right skills to be successful in this new work environment? And so it's going to be an interesting future as we start rolling people back to work, and it's not going to look like what it did. And so, I think the question was around lessons learned. Is I think we got a lot of really good out of this. And in order to maximize it, we've got to figure out how to harness all that good and keep it going moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a really good point. There's things that have been learned, and also how that feeds into human resource practices. We're coming up on the first real hiring cycle in the COVID experience. How does has that changed your outlook? I mean, you've got a certain number of people that I'm certain have retired or have left the company. Now you've got to fill some slots, right?
Absolutely. It's been a challenge, right? I had to onboard 2 employees during this time, right? And I've talked to them, and part of it is you have to have a lot more, they're not in person, but they're on the computer conversations. But it was a challenge onboarding new employees. It was a challenge to integrate them into your culture, right? Because they're not living it every day. And then it's also seeing how these people react in different situations, right? How do they react in a tense meeting? If everybody's in a conference room and you don't like what somebody's saying, you can't turn off your camera and flip them the bird or whatever you do, right, to express your frustration, right? You don't have that, right? You've got to be, so how do people handle these different situations? It's been an interesting year. It started as a challenge, but the technology's improved and our ability to use the technology is improved, and, people are all growing at the same time. So I think it creates a lot of great opportunities, but I do think we can't forget that leadership part. We can't forget how to onboard new employees so that they get that culture part that makes companies that makes companies work. So I think that's going to be our challenge.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Graham, for you, how, a year ago, if we were talking, one of the challenges people in sort of utility-based businesses would say, or infrastructure, is how do I find a next generation talent that's of people that are going to want to do this? Have you found that going through this experience, you've suddenly got a renewed interest of people saying, hey, this is actually a really important, interesting thing to wind up working on? And, how are you finding people going forward on this?
Well, I think certainly it's always been a challenge, particularly in the sewer field, to find people who are really interested in working in a wastewater environment. And what I would say is that once you could scratch through the stigma that's associated with working in this industry, people find that it's extremely interesting. It combines a lot of different disciplines, from science to engineering to finance to HR to instrumentation to mechanical abilities. And once people are involved, so our biggest challenge, I think, is selling what we do, how evolved it is from a technological standpoint, and how necessary it is. And one of the things that we've been working on is trying to develop apprenticeship programs so that we go into the high schools and two-year colleges and talk about not only what we do, but also the fact you can make a very good living, and the fact that we are absolutely recession proof, because there's always going to be a need for people to work in the water and wastewater sector. And I think that as we've gotten older and as we've become more mature in this industry, we've realized that that is a very valuable thing. We only have to look back 13 years with the recession to look at what happened to unemployment, what happened to our markets, and yet water and sewer districts continue to be, moving forward, and we didn't have to lay anybody off.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think it's interesting pointing out the recessionary impacts on it. Looking at manufacturing, one of the case studies people talked about over the past year is the great toilet paper shortage of April or whatever it was. That was a supply chain problem. It wasn't a manufacturing problem. Right. We make 100 million rolls a week. We consume 100 million rolls a week. It's getting them to where they need them is the hard part on that. Maybe we need a future Thrive session on supply chains we can wind up looking at with that.
Absolutely.
But David, I wonder if you can share, you've got two insights on this. One is you've looked at projects around these sort of infrastructure, but also you're working with students directly in how they learn, how they do their work. How do you think this will go back? There's a discussion on campus of, hey, when do we return to how it was? Will the new normal be different from your perspective on that?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, the new normal. And we were having conversations. So most everything I do is project-based learning. So where they're actually learning how to work on projects, they work in teams together. And in the past, they would go to the Cooper Library or anywhere on campus and basically meet together at a table. And so they were talking about, how much time did this take? And so they had to go to the meeting, they had to get up, they had to get shower, probably get dressed, drive to campus, find a parking place, go across campus, find a place to meet, and then reverse that. And they were spending 3 hours, 3.5 hours to do that meeting. Well, now with Zoom or Teams or whatever platform they're using, if the meeting was only 30 minutes long, they're on and off, and they've picked up 3 hours. The point is that I think what we're going to find is that there's a lot of silver linings that came from this whole experience. We've got to figure out what those are going to be. How do we capitalize on those? And I think that the way we work together will change in that regard. I still think, looking outside of the student experience, is I still think we have a lot of voids, in the broadband industry across the state we've got to fill. But I do believe that one thing is that we've got to really focus on is this whole concept of business continuity. How do we continue to operate when bad things happen? And so now, if we look at, for example, if we have an ice storm, does that mean that school's canceled, or does that just mean that class will be online now? So we may find that we are finding ways to become more resilient because of this. So,
yeah. Well, I find also the lessons a student might get out of this is that it's, you're going through engineering, but you want to be one of those, what I call and people, right? It's not an or people. You're not an engineer or a leader. you're an engineer who knows to lead, right? And, you know, in terms of curriculum, I know talking to the students I've talked to, many of them are actually looking and saying what classes they're taking based on that, just from seeing some of the experience. I don't know if you're seeing that with some of the students as well.
Oh, absolutely. We had one of the interns we were utilizing this summer. She was in microbiology, and we dunked her head into broadband. And it has opened her world up because it's a different type of research. She's using different tools. Actually, this last December, she presented to FEMA. So they're getting all of these experiences that are beyond the textbook. And those are the experiences, in my opinion, coming from industry that I see that they need. And I think this is just another way that we actually can improve education.
Yeah, and I think that's coming out of this. One of the things that will differentiate students is in the job market or whatever they do next is, how did you respond to this? Did you sit down and say, oh, this is woe me? Or did you say, how am I going to deal with this new reality, right? And that's going to be a differentiator.
And that's one point on that was the amazing part is that the students perceive themselves as being resilient and almost to the point to where they're anti-fragile, because through this experience, they've actually got stronger.
Yeah, exactly. So, John, we got a few minutes left here. I'm going to let you wind up wrapping up. And I guarantee one thing that will be true after COVID as well as before COVID is there's going to be a need for financing out there. So are you optimistic? You pessimistic? How do you think things are going to wind up going as a result of having gone through this experience?
Well, let's talk work-wise. I think we are looking at it from a standpoint of the world has learned a lot through this process. And while it's going to change, it's going to go back much more the way it was than I think a lot of people think it was. I think we, as people who have been working, you know, I graduated Clemson in '87, so been out there quite a while. It's very easy for me to sit at home and work from home and say, okay, fine. I don't need to go commute an hour each way. And I don't need to because I already have my network of individuals built up. But I think there's a younger generation that needs the social side of work. They need the interaction. They need to develop their network. As Chris mentioned, you know, how do they shine? And they need to do that in person. And I think a lot of those individuals are going to demand going back into an office type environment. Maybe it's not 5-6 days a week. Maybe it's only 3 or 4 days a week. You know, that's an important point. I also find through a lot of discussions I have that people are over meeting right now. People are having way too many Zoom meetings. And with that, because it's very easy, you can hear, you know, I have a friend of mine who's a lender at Morgan Stanley. And he goes, I have so many Zoom meetings each day that I don't have time to do anything, which I thought was quite an interesting reaction to all of this. From the investment world, listen, rates are going to go up. It's going to become more expensive financial projects. You know, there's just, with all the tax dollars, tax increases are going to happen. It's just rates are going to go up. The Fed's not going to be able to support low interest rates through the use of their balance sheet or through, you know, just open market operations. Not going to be able to do that forever. So it's going to become more costly for private companies to raise debt. It's going to be more costly for municipalities to raise debt to finance these projects. But with that comes a higher rate of return. So while it may be painful for the next 6, 12, 18 months as we recover, I guarantee that 24 months, 36 months from now, we'll be in a better place than we were now as the economy's opening back up. Projects continue to happen. They will always happen. We will always find a way to persevere. So we're pretty optimistic overall.
So an
there's a lot
of
of need out there. Trust me, there's a ton of need out there. I just drove all the way down to Florida, and trust me, there's a parts of Pennsylvania and Virginia that really need new infrastructure. They need new bridges. They need new highways. And you know, in South Carolina and Georgia, you guys have wonderful, beautiful highways. You just need more police to, you know, few extra lanes because they're really crowded, and maybe a few more policemen to, you know, make sure the young Richard Pettys aren't crazy.
Well, with that, thank you very much. You know, I think it sounds like you're saying it's a long-range positive outcome. There's going to be change, and we're going to keep moving forward and thriving on this. So
Very
I
much
want to thank everybody here. I'm going to turn this back over to Dean Gramapati and for some closing comments.
Um, Thank you all for being over here. I mean, can I have a show of hands from all the panelists, because I'm getting feedback that we would like this panel to come back at a later time, sometimes in the year. I never heard that from so many people in the audience. If you're willing, John, David, Graham, and Chris, we would love to have you guys back and see where we are now in the month of February, but where we stand almost a year from now, right? Things would change. We have a new government, new policies. COVID may be under control, and so maybe higher interest rates. So how does the infrastructure plan look then? So I think it will be of great interest for our audience, for the same folks to come back to rethink what they said. It's right now, like you said, John, it's a great time to build. It's a great time for renewables. Graham built a tunnel for $40 million. Maybe a year and a half from now, it costs 3 times as much. So I hope not, but thank you, each one of you. On behalf of John Lummis and myself, Mark, thank you for all you do for Clemson. And this is one of the most interesting and most informative session for me. So stay well, stay safe. Hopefully all of you get a vaccine in the coming months. So thank you, and go Tigers.
Thank you. Next
Thank
time
you,
in
everyone.
person.
Great job,
And
Mark.
Oh, thank you, everybody.
great job, Mark. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Hey,
Thanks,
John,
Mark.
I'm actually going to follow up with you. I want to get, I don't know if you guys do any early stage investment, but I want to get your insight on a couple of early stage tech things that
No.
relevant to hear if you've got a few minutes sometime.
I have, if I will listen to you, and then I will probably put you in touch with the right people.
Yeah.
We have a lot. I have 30 years on Wall Street. There are a lot of contacts of people who invest in a lot of different things. Be really happy to have those conversations and put you in touch with. Starting to get the phone calls in from the boys in Greenville.
Sorry, I'll give you an email. I'll get your email from Amy.
Yeah, it's easy. I'll get it to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Jeff Ford.
Hey, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Graham.
Great
Thank you, Chris.
job. Great
Thank you,
job,
David.
everybody. Thank you.
Good luck,
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you. Talk to y'all later.
Bye.